I'm Jonathan Culpeper from the Department of Linguistics and English Language and also part of CAS. What I'd like to do in this video is to share some of my work and experiences using Corpus to examine politeness in particular. That's one of my main areas of research. So the title of my talk is British Politeness Re-evaluated through Corpus Methods, and that's very much the sort of thing I like to do with the Corpus methodology, is to explode myths about politeness and actually also about impoliteness. But you'll note from my title that I've just said British politeness. That actually is a little bit misleading. I'm going to say nothing about politeness in Scotland or Wales or anything like that. I'm actually talking about English politeness. That would be the more precise title of this video. So let's set the scene first of all, and the sort of area I'm going into. And I'm going to set the scene by first of all talking about the politeness side of things, some of the issues that I want to address through the Corpus methodology. So that'll be the first part of what I'm doing. Then I'll get into talking about the Corpus methodology, and finally, in the next video, I'll be talking about the results of applying the Corpus method. So in academia, the main work on politeness, the classic work, is Brown and Levinson, 1987, Universals in Language Usage, Politeness Phenomena. This is the classic, not just the classic, it's the most cited work. Thousands of studies have used it. But that's the academic book. What sort of stuff is it trying to address? And it would include scenarios like this. We want to do things with our language. We want to perform things, do things successfully. Let's say I'm thirsty and I go into a coffee shop and I want a cup of coffee. So I walk up to the person at the counter and I say, well, I'll tell you what I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say, give me a coffee. That would be unlikely. Well, it may get me a coffee, but it probably upset the person who's serving me. I would say something like, can you give me a coffee? Could I have a cup of coffee? Something like that. I might add in please. And this is what politeness is all about. It's how you achieve your goals and do so in a harmonious way, diplomatic way, through using politeness routines. Can you give me a cup of coffee? It's literally a question. Of course, the person behind the counter wouldn't say, yes, I can, and then do nothing, because we understand that as a sort of indirect way of asking for the actual coffee. And that's what politeness is about, particularly in England. It's about those polite routines of succeeding in terms of what you want, not imposing on the other person. That's particularly the British view, the English view of politeness, as we'll see in a minute. Okay, so that's Brown and Levinson. The other area I want to tap into is what some people have described as cross-cultural pragmatics. And this is how, this includes how politeness varies from culture to culture. We have different routines, different ways of asking for things. If I give you a particular example, I've suggested the coffee shop scenario, me getting thirsty, going in and asking for a coffee. Now, if I was in Italy and listening to how people did it there, they wouldn't do it in the same way. So it'd be quite possible to go into Italy and Italian coffee shop and say, mi dai un caffè, which translates as, give me a coffee. Don't try that in Britain, it wouldn't be successful, at least it would make the other person upset. But so in Italy it'd be actually fine to say that, no one would bat an eyelid. What they might have done in addition is something rather different. They don't come up with some indirect question like, can you give me a cup of coffee? What they would say, possibly first of all, would be buongiorno. So they would say hello, they do all this nice sugaring the pill kind of talk, sweetening stuff, and then they go directly for what they want. So it's an entirely different approach. It's still politeness, but a different routine to achieve what they want and maintain harmonious relations at the same time. So there you have it. You have politeness routines through language being performed differently in different cultures, and that's very much what this talk is about. What is special about this talk is I want to look at different ways of doing it, different cultures of politeness, but within one country, England, and one language. A lot of work in cross-cultural pragmatics is looking across languages, comparing England with Italy, England and Germany, etc., etc. What is different about the work I want to do is actually called variational pragmatics. This kind of pragmatics is a bit like looking at different dialects, but it's looking at different politeness practices, etc., within one language, within English. Or I might go off into Germany. I'd look at the difference between German German, Austrian German, and Swiss German. It's that kind of thing. So it's all within one language. And I'm particularly interested in differences between the north of England and the south of England, between differences in class. Do people higher up, upper middle class folk do something different from working class folk? That's the sort of thing that I want to get at with the corpus methodology. Okay, so if you look at the books about what would be typical for English politeness, I've already given you the example of the coffee shop example, and I want to build on that and pin down what is typical of British politeness, English politeness, and then we will move into some of the variation later. So one of the things the studies go on about, including Brown and Leveson, the classic work, they say, they put a lot of emphasis on the individual. In fact, they say Western politeness in general emphasizes the individual. Think about my example. It's about what I want to get, and it's about how I'm going to butter you up so that you give it to me, my coffee, without upsetting you. Not all cultures work like that. And that's an important thing. There have been quite a few studies that have been done on Japanese culture, Chinese culture, and they've shown that what people orientate to are not necessarily individuals, but actually groups. It's how they're seen in the group. So you can cause a lot of offense in Japan or China if you imply that someone is not doing their job within the group. They're not being a good team leader, they're not being a good teacher or something like that. So a lot of the politeness doesn't orientate towards not imposing on an individual. It actually orientates to buttering them up within the group, saying what a great person they are, performing their group role. So it's a rather different kind of thing. In some ways, it's a much more collective way of thinking about politeness, not the individual, about groups of people, how you fit in. We'll come back to that idea later. Another idea that comes out of quite a number of works, they say that British politeness, they use the word British politeness, English politeness is probably what they mean, is characterized by lots of indirectness, or what sometimes are called off-record comments. They're hints, effectively. Indirectness is my example. Rather than saying, give me a cup of coffee, the direct way, you ask a question, can you give me a coffee? Classic example. And so they bang on about English politeness being comprised of that. And there does seem to be some evidence that people in England avoid direct ways of doing something because that's seen as too imposing. And so to sum up, what you've got here is a picture of English politeness characterized by the individual or individuals, one person talking to another one, what they're doing at the individual level. It's characterized by non-imposition, not imposing directly on someone. You do it indirectly, you go round the bush, you beat around the bush. That's how you get stuff done. And the other thing that seems to pop up is this notion, a connected notion, of privacy. That you're doing all this stuff round the back, you don't want to impose on them, and you want to respect their rights as an individual, their privacy and all the rest of it. That's another feature that comes out. Sometimes people use the word negative politeness for some of what I've been talking about, particularly that idea of being indirect. It's not just people actually in linguistics talking about this kind of stuff, or the branch of linguistics called pragmatics. It also anthropology. In a very popular book by Kate Fox, Watching the English, the Hidden Rules of English Behaviour, which is, I'm sure has sold hundreds of thousands of copies because it's a very entertaining book, and I know it was in the top selling list for a while. Kate Fox is talking about the practices of the English, and she talks about politeness too. And she says this: the identification of England as a predominantly negative politeness culture, that means not wanting to impose on each other, respecting privacy, etc., concerned mainly with the avoidance of imposition and intrusion, seems to me quite helpful. The important point here is that politeness and courtesy, as practiced by the English, have very little to do with friendliness or good nature. That's the key thing. Very little, as she said, very little to do with friendliness or good nature. I want to see if that's true. Is it the case that it's all to do with respecting privacy, not intruding, not imposing, as all the books all seem to say, or does it actually connect up with friendliness and good nature? Or maybe just some part of the population has a more friendly, good nature kind of approach. Think about the Italian example. That's much more to do with friendliness and good nature. What you do is you go into the coffee shop, you say buongiorno, you get all those good relations going, and then you ask directly for what you want. Yeah? But Kate Fox is saying that's not what the British are all about. They're it's about respecting privacy, non-imposing. I want to look at really what is going on, and we're going to do it through the Corpus method. Now, the way into some of this stuff is to look at the notion of meta-language. The important thing here is that what is meta-language? Meta-language is to do with language, talk about talk, language about language. The word polite is in fact a meta-linguistic term. So if I say, oh, that's a polite way of doing it, I am talking about your talk. I'm describing, with polite, an adjective, I'm describing your talk. I could go the other way around. I could say, oh, that was rude. In fact, people are often moaning about things being rude or impolite. But again, that's meta-language as well. So the way into trying to understand what people think about politeness is actually to study the meta-language. What are people actually referring to and meaning and doing with words like polite? And that's the way into it with the corpus, because I can use the corpus method, to look at an item like polite and get a handle on what people are doing with it. What do they mean by it? What kinds of words does it go with? Does it go with words that suggest that people value being indirect, respecting privacy? Or is it more like the Italian way of doing things, that they're valuing this sort of friendliness, good social relations kind of approach? So that's my way into things, to look at meta-language, and that's what we're going to be doing with all the corpus work. In fact, more recently, there is a particular approach to politeness studies, not the classic approach that Brown and Levinson represents. There's a particular approach that was pioneered by people like Elan, 2001, and Watts, 2003. And they argue that the problem with Brown and Levinson is, Levinson, they say, is a bit like a sort of scientist coming in, imposing categories on what is going on. What Watts and Elan say, well, they don't get to the real stuff. What are people actually doing? What do they mean when they say something's polite or courteous or considerate? So what they're really saying here is that, yes, the meta-language is important. If we want to get hold of this stuff, why don't we look at what people are doing when they evaluate something as polite or whatever? It's a bit like what I'm saying. So that's the Watts type of approach. I think it's the way forward. The problem with Watts and co. is that they don't systematically look at the usage of words like polite. They don't use the corpus methodology. If we're going to produce a dictionary, for example, the method of choice is the corpus-based method. So surely if you want to understand how polite is being used, you use the corpus method. They didn't do it because it's not on their particular radar. So that's what I'm going to be doing. How am I going to do it? You need something big. You need a lot of data. And one of the reasons I say that is because the word polite doesn't occur so often in the English language. It occurs fewer times than actually the word rude, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, our focus is on the word polite. So we need a big corpus, and the one I'm using is the Oxford English corpus, which contains over 2 billion words. So it is indeed big. And it's from the period 2000 to 2006. It's divided into 20 major subject areas, including various writings of all sorts, blogs and so on. You can find out more details about it by searching on the web. That's my data, and I'm going to be using Sketch Engine. I'll talk a little bit about that in the next video. I'll be using Sketch Engine to interrogate that data. So that's it for now. In the next video I will begin to introduce some of the results that I get looking at that metalinguistic term polite in the Oxford English corpus.